Good morning.
Morning.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Good.
Yeah. How are things down that way?
Well, things in general are pretty good. I'm struggling to get over a cold. So
Me too.
I may be clearing my throat a lot and sniffing, but I did test for COVID, wasn't COVID. Well, I don't know how accurate the tests are, but I'm pretty sure it's not COVID.
Sure.
So
As far as you know.
just
Yeah.
run-of-the-mill nasty sniffly stuff. So how are things up your way?
Well, one piece of drama.
Mm-hmm.
Our daycare sent a message saying that in doing some roof repair, they found asbestos. So they have to close down for 3 weeks.
Oh my.
while they're doing abatement. Thankfully, it's like a chain. It's kinder care.
Okay.
So they have places in other daycares around town, so we can use that. But yeah, it's weird.
that's some drama.
Unexpected.
Yeah. That stuff's still floating around.
Yeah, I didn't think the building was that old, but I guess it is.
Yeah. We got to go see before it was open, we got to see the Lyric Theater here in Birmingham when they were just beginning renovations. And so I don't remember, we went as part of a group, and of course you couldn't get up on the stage because it would fall in and stuff, but they had the old the curtain, the big curtain, which they said is entirely asbestos, because the whole idea was, right, if the floor lights, if I can't remember what they're called, anyway, they would flame out. The idea was this asbestos curtain, footlights. Thank you, Camille. This asbestos curtain could come down, and it was a safety measure.
Wow.
We're in there looking up like, oh, that's interesting. Yes, fire curtain. Yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, it was pretty cool too. I mean, and now of course the Lyric is gorgeous, but it was be a great setting when it was all looking run down. It looked like something from a disaster or horror movie, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah. I love abandoned spaces.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I love the Urbex videos. People going to, like, especially the old abandoned theme parks. That's fun to see. That's like super creepy.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And underground Birmingham does some cool stuff too. Like going into the mines and some abandoned stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, we always had to dissuade Leo from, like, he was like, oh, it's just around the corner. Like, no, bud, that's, you don't need to go there.
Maybe start out with some like caves that are actually for tourists, I guess.
known quantities are a little
I will say that, like,
older.
We went to Mammoth Cave once, and like there's some stuff you can do there, like on tours, that feels pretty, like, off the rails.
Yeah.
And they used to do at Cathedral Caverns, they used to let you, like, they had like a tour that would take you further back in. Like, mud holes.
Good morning, Paula.
Hello. For some reason, I could not get Zoom on my computer, but my tablet did it beautifully.
Huh. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I see your text. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, now my computer just pulled about 5 minutes late.
Double Paula.
Well, I'm glad you're on. Thanks for getting on. I'm not sure if Melissa's joining us or not. We'll give her a minute or two. I'm getting a little feedback, Paula, so I'm gonna mute you real quick.
Okay.
So we're gonna, well, it's not, apparently not where it's coming from. Hang on. Oh, I've got you on two places. All right. I've muted you on both places, so whichever one you're going to use, you can unmute. Sorry about that. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? If Melissa joins us.
I still have me on two places.
Yeah. Hang on a second.
Did you disconnect on your tablet? Or turn off the tablet?
I can remove the tablet.
Kick it.
We can get Paula in stereo. Okay, so you're talking, but you're muted on one of them.
Okay, I totally turned the tablet off, and
Okay.
I'm still up there.
Yeah, I'll remove it. There you go. So now we got you. Now we got you for real.
Great.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I think what we'll do is I'll just be liturgist, and if y'all are cool with keeping the roles, Rob, if you can be voice of the people. Just FYI, instead of doing a reading from the Hebrew Bible, we're going to do a reading from the Apocrypha. It's Sirach. Since we don't spend a lot of time in there, and that was on the readings today, I thought let's go ahead and pull something in that's a little different. So let's get started here. All right, can y'all see the screen? All right. On this day in 1502, Queen Isabella I of Castile outlawed Islam in her kingdom and forced Muslims to convert to Catholicism. On this day in 2004, Mayor Gavin Newsom instructed the city of San Francisco to begin issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And on this day in 2016, Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill signed an ecumenical declaration. This was the first such agreement since Catholic and Russian Orthodox churches split in the Great Schism of 1054. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Our responsive reading is from Psalm 119. Those whose way is blameless, who walk in the Lord's instruction, are truly happy.
Those who guard God's laws are truly happy. They seek God with all their hearts.
They don't even do anything wrong. They walk in God's ways.
God, you have ordered that your decrees should be kept most carefully.
How I wish my ways were strong when it comes to keeping your statutes.
Then I wouldn't be ashamed when I examine all your commandments.
I will give thanks to you with a heart that does right as I learn your righteous rules.
I will keep your statutes. Please don't leave me all alone.
Sirach 15 through 20. If you choose to, you will keep the commandments and keep faith out of goodwill. He has put fire and water before you. You can stretch out your hand for whichever you choose. Life and death are in front of human beings, and they will be granted whichever they please, because the wisdom of the Lord is great. He's mighty in authority. He sees everything. His eyes are upon those who fear him, and he knows every human action. He doesn't command anyone to be ungodly, and he doesn't give anyone a license to sin.
Matthew 5:13 through 20. You have heard that it was said to those who lived long ago, don't commit murder, and all who commit murder will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with their brother or sister will be in danger of judgment. If they say to their brother or sister, you idiot, they will be in danger of being condemned by the governing council. And if they say, you fool, they will be in danger of fiery hell. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, Leave your gift at the altar and go. First, make things right with your brother or sister, and then come back and offer your gift. Be sure to make friends quickly with your opponents while you're with them on the way to court. Otherwise, they will haul you before the judge. The judge will turn you over to the officer of the court, and you will be thrown into prison. I say to you in all seriousness that you won't get out of there until you've paid the very last penny. You have heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. But I say to you that every man who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to fall into sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better that you lose a part of your body than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to fall into sin, chop it off and throw it away. It's better that you lose a part of your body than that your whole body go into hell. It was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a divorce certificate. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife except for sexual unfaithfulness forces her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those who lived long ago, don't make a false solemn pledge, but you should follow through on what you have pledged to the Lord. But I say to you that you must not pledge at all. You must not pledge by heaven, because it's God's throne. You must not pledge by the earth, because it's God's footstool. You must not pledge by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. And you must not pledge by your head, because you can't turn one hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
You're muted, Dave.
Thank you. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. No one can become fully aware of the very essence of another human being unless he loves him. By his love, he is enabled to see the essential traits and features in the beloved person. And even more, he sees that which is potential in him, which is not yet actualized, but yet ought to be actualized. Furthermore, by his love, the loving person enables the beloved person to actualize these potentialities. By making him aware of what he can be and what he should become, he makes these potentialities come true." So thank you all for getting us started in worship. We'll move into a time of prayer. I'll get us started, and if you're watching on one of our streaming services, you can share prayer concerns or praises simply by putting them in the chat. Excuse me. Or if you're on Zoom, you can put them in the chat. By the way, if you are watching on one of the streaming services, Facebook or YouTube, if you don't mind clicking like or just comment with where you're watching from, that gives us a way to count you. We do like taking attendance. So thanks for being here with us today. Let's go to God in prayer. Oh, actually, before we go to God in prayer, because and I know God's not put off by that, because it's not like, oh, you fooled me. Would someone be willing to monitor Facebook for prayer concerns?
Yeah, I've got Facebook pulled up.
All right, I'll do the same for YouTube. Okay, let's pray together. Heavenly God, our Mother and Father, Jesus, our sibling, Holy Spirit, the breath that enlivens all things, we give you thanks that you are always with us, that you attend to our very thoughts, that you call us to become aware and awake, to live in the moment, to see the blessings that you are pouring out on us minute by minute. Oftentimes we get stuck in the past or in the future. We ruminate on what should have been differently, or we think about what should happen. And we recognize none of those things are actually real. Help us to pay attention to the present moment. Our hearts go out to those who are suffering for a variety of reasons. We lift up to you the entire world and its brokenness. Our hearts especially go out to those affected by the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, those suffering under conditions of war, in Ethiopia and Ukraine. Our hearts go out to our neighbors who are often suffering in silence. Lord, we are aware that everyone is involved in a great struggle, that whatever problems we have seem like the biggest problems in the world, and that in the realm of human suffering, that we're not in a competition. Help us to be moved with compassion by all those whose problems are simply a reflection of our own, that we share these burdens together, and that in sharing them, they become less. We name before you the people in our lives who we ask your healing touch upon. We name before you the faults in ourselves that we have difficulty naming. We know that you see all with compassion. And I invite those of you listening to lift up your own prayer concerns or praises.
Vicky McCarty,
Lord, hear our prayer.
Ed Davis,
Lord, hear our prayer.
or Stanley Hurst,
Lord, hear our
Jenny
prayer.
Fountain,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Kyle,
Lord, hear our prayer.
or Camille's mom and aunt,
Lord, hear our prayer.
or transgender children and adults,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for migrants who are displaced,
Lord, hear our prayer.
gracious God, for those that we name and for all the concerns that are unnamed, we give you thanks that even before we speak them, you hear and that you answer. And we join Jesus in the prayer that he taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So today we're continuing our look at the Sermon on the Mount, and I kind of put off a few of the questions because I was going to deal with them this week, but I have to get some coffee first. So Jesus is, let me set the scene again. Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount to his gathered disciples, and they've gathered around him on a mountain. And by the way, I left off something I really kind of think is cool. It's oftentimes you see Jesus perched on top of a mountain and all the people kind of gathered around underneath him. That's a terrible way to preach, because people can't hear you. So the kind of prevailing scholarship, the thought is that actually the people were up on the hill and that he's preaching to them like in a standard amphitheater, a coliseum. It's a lot easier to hear that way. Anyway, so he's gathered with the disciples and he has just finished. So we started with the Beatitudes, the kind of the hook where he says, happy are the miserable. And everyone kind of looks at each other and asks what he's talking about. And he goes on to say that he wants his followers to be like a community of prophets. And he says, I'm raising the bar. I have high standards for you. He says, and this is what introduced last week, don't think I'm abolishing the Torah and the prophets. I'm not abolishing, but I'm fulfilling them because I want your righteousness to exceed that of the Pharisees. Okay, so before we get into this next bit, let me take a step back. Who are the Pharisees? We hear them referred to in the Gospels all the time. Oftentimes they're the bad guys because they're very strictly religious, and Jesus seems to be, kind of rubbing their nose in it. A lot of times when they mean hypocrisy, they refer to Pharisees. By the way, don't do that. The Pharisees were good folks. Part of their philosophy was that, and let me say that for a lot of Jewish people, when they read the Torah, they read a lot of the laws that applied to people as applying not to everyone indiscriminately, but just to priests. The Torah was about how priests should behave. And the Pharisees were like, no, that's actually meant for everybody. Everyone should behave this way. We're supposed to be like a nation of priests for the whole world. So they had a particular philosophy that the Torah wasn't just about how we worship. It wasn't just about how the monarchy should be, constructed. It was about how we should live. And for them, the Torah was really important. They had just come out of, I say just, but they had been through the Babylonian exile. So instead of the temple being the important thing or the rituals being the important thing, it was the Torah. It was the law. So they were saying, it's not just priests, we should all behave this way. So when Jesus tells his disciples, your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees, he's kind of one-upping it, right? Okay, so got that principle, right? But as he said earlier, don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. There's something going on here. People think Jesus and his disciples are violating Torah or abolishing Torah. They're thinking things like, your disciples don't wash their hands before they eat, which was a religious ritual. They get in trouble for that later in the gospel. They're saying things like, your disciples sometimes do work on the Sabbath. Again, abolishing Torah. They're violating things. And so Jesus is being a little defensive in the Sermon on the Mount here. He says, oh no, I'm not abolishing Torah. I'm amplifying it. I'm fulfilling it. So in other words, he's saying, I've got a different interpretation, right, that actually raises the bar. And then he starts this section that we're going to dig into today. He says, and it's kind of he has a formula. You've heard that it was said, but I tell you. So you've heard that it was said, don't murder. I tell you, don't be angry. You've heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. I tell you, don't lust. You've heard that it was said, you can get a divorce if you do this. I tell you, don't divorce at all. You've heard that it was said, you make your vows this way. I'm telling you, don't make vows. Say, let your yes be yes, your no be no. So there's a pattern here, and there's something that Jesus is trying to get across, right? He's making the argument, I'm actually amplifying Torah, I'm not diminishing it. But it's important to keep in mind that this is defensive rhetoric. So he's doing two different things. When he says, you've heard that it was said, but I tell you, he is relativizing Torah. He's saying my words are actually stronger, so you should pay attention to them. See the rhetoric, how it does two things? It does relativize the Torah. It places higher demands on the inner life and on relationships. Okay, so kind of what we struggled a little bit last week, and I think this is the place people get most hung up. I'll go ahead and say the place people get most hung up in this passage is the bit about chopping off body parts if you lust. And I'll say that because I'm currently in a mental health counseling program, and I work with clients who have obsessive compulsive disorder, this verse comes up a lot. I shouldn't have lustful thoughts, and that having lustful thoughts makes me a bad person. And if I were really righteous, I'd just cut off my hand or pluck out my eye. By the way, there's like an obvious body part that's missing here, especially because Jesus is talking to men, right? I don't know if that's meant to be like by implication that you would take that even further. And I bring that up because people did that. In fact, in the first few centuries of the Christian church, bishops, there are letters from bishops writing their congregations saying, no, don't castrate yourselves. This is not what this passage means. All right. They had to write letters because people were already taking these things and interpreting them literally. I don't think Jesus ever meant for people to take them literally. You can say, maybe you should have phrased it differently. I don't know. But I think it's pretty clear that if you follow this to an extreme, if you don't read this as hyperbole, if you follow it to its extreme, it becomes absurdity, right? I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. The big problems we have with this are anger and lust. And as I said last time, Jesus says, don't call anyone fool, right? And then in Matthew chapter 23, he goes off on the Pharisees and he calls them fools, asps. He says they tie up heavy burdens for other people and don't lift a finger to move them. He calls them blind guides. He calls them everything but a child of God, as they say, right? He tears into them. He's clearly angry. So if we're going to read these passages about anger and lust in light of Jesus' actual actions in his ministry, we'd have to say, well, gosh, is Jesus a hypocrite? Because he tells people not to be angry, and then he is clearly angry. He's clearly calling people fool. So, gosh, Jesus, sounds like Jesus is going to hell, right? Because that's what it says in the passage. Obviously, this is an absurdity. We're not supposed to read this way, which means maybe we should go back and dig into it a little carefully. And I think this is often the case. Like, go back, read things more critically. I'm actually going to pull the passage up on the screen here. Whoops. Oh, of course, I got the wrong one. Here we go. He says, everyone who is angry with their brother or sister will be in danger of judgment. And then he goes on saying, you fool, you idiot. And then he gets to the therefore. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go. So immediately, his first illustration is not you being angry with someone else. It's someone else being angry with you. You're trying to help someone else deal with their anger, right? If you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, and then he says, and this is the bit that's kind of shocking, leave your gift at the altar and go. In other words, ritual is not as important as your relationship with this other person who's mad at you. Go make peace with them first, and then you will be in a fit spot to come make your gift. That's a very different kind of situation, right? Than you being angry with someone. And then the very next illustration after that is make things right. Be sure to make friends quickly with your opponents while you are on the way with them to court. Otherwise, they will haul you before the judge. The judge will turn you over to the officer of the court. Again, it's someone with something against you. It's not you having something against someone else. Jesus is saying, look, because anger is so toxic, this is what I want you to do. I want you to be a peacemaker, which is exactly what he said back in the Beatitudes, right? So this ties back into making peace. Be a peacemaker. So I don't really think this is really about being angry. You're going to get angry. Anger is going to happen. There's some kinds of anger that you would be, if you weren't angry, you would probably be a terrible person, right? I mean, there's some things that should make you angry. So I hope that changes the way we hear the anger passage, because then when we dig into the next passage, again, reading it critically, I think is important. First of all, again, he's talking to men. He says, every man who looks at a woman lustfully. So I guess women don't have lust. The idea here is who's he speaking to? What's the power dynamic? He gets into that immediately afterwards. It says, whoever divorces his wife must give her a divorce certificate. Men had the power of divorce. Women didn't have the power. So he's addressing an existing power dynamic in his society. And so he's talking mainly to men. We've seen a lot in the news recently about, especially about older male celebrities who really like dating younger women, and they cycle through their partners because, oh, you're too old now, and the ageism that women experience, et cetera, right? I think this is Jesus' way of addressing that, for one thing. I think that's probably top of the pile for Jesus. How are women treated in this society? That's one way that I'm reading it. I think the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that he's doing an interesting dance here. Again, he's going to the Hebrew Bible, to the Ten Commandments, and he's saying, you've heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. Don't think just because you're following these rules that you've achieved enlightenment, that everything is fine. I want you to change something about the way you think about relationships, about the way that you express yourself, about the way that you live your inner life. So when someone comes to me because they are struggling with this passage particularly, I'm reminded of a story about a young man who was engaged to be married. He came to me and told me that he was having sinful thoughts about his fiancée, and he couldn't stop imagining having sex with her, and that this was causing him a lot of distress. And so I said to him, well, would you like for us to pray for God to remove your sexual desire for your fiancée? And he said, no, because that would be absurd, right? Again, thinking about what does this actually lead us to? If we're reading lust as sexual desire, and sexual desire is bad, we shouldn't be here. None of us would be here, right? That goes back to Genesis, when God created human beings and said, go forth, be fruitful and multiply. Oh, but don't have sexual desire. None of us would be here. So sexual desire, in fact, is affirmed again and again and again. So this word lust, I think it's important to make a couple of distinctions. One is, I don't think lust means sexual desire. I think human beings have sexual desire. I think lust, the way I would define lust, is intentionally focusing on one's own sexual pleasure or desire in such a way that it diminishes the humanity of another person. In other words, it's a form of objectification, dehumanization. And when you actually look at the Greek word here, that's actually what it means, because it's the same word as to covet. Okay, so for some reason, we translate it as lust instead of coveting. So if you think this is a little far-fetched, then I do think it's important to go back to the source material and look at the actual 10 commandments that Jesus is referring to here. It says here, do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not testify falsely against your neighbor. There's that little promise and pledge thing in a minute. And then do not desire, and usually translated as covet, your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox, donkey, etc. So the reason why I think it's more properly read as covet is Jesus is saying, look, right here, do not commit adultery. It's not just about whether or not you've violated the law, whether you've slept with someone else. It's about, are you coveting somebody else? So he's taking this commandment here, do not commit adultery, and he's tying it to this commandment here, do not covet. Because we all really kind of excuse coveting, don't we? So I don't think the word is properly translated as lust. I think Jesus is pushing us back to understand, look, we give a pass to coveting all the time because it's an interior state. You can't see it. This is, by the way, the only commandment that is about an interior state, not coveting. So Jesus is taking this commandment about adultery and saying, look, this is really about, again, relationships and your internal state. What are you cultivating in your life, right? So again, I'm going to tell you the practical consequences of this, of the literal reading of this passage, are really awful. and it has helped contribute to a lot of sexual dysfunction in the world, a lot of anxiety. I can tell you, seeing people with OCD who have sexual obsessive compulsive disorder, who feel like God is judging them always because they have sexual thoughts, we have to go back and we have to start at a really basic level and talk about, what is your brain designed to do? Your brain is designed to keep you alive and to reproduce. And that's really the evolutionary function of your brain, right? So occasionally your brain is going to just come up with a thought, and it may be a taboo thought. It may be about having sex with somebody else. Your brain is really good at generating all kinds of scenarios. That's what it does. And it throws these scenarios in front of you and says, how are you going to handle this? Or remember that thing you did? If you were to do it over again, how would you handle it? And that's why I can be lying in my bed trying to go to sleep, and I'll remember a junior high dance that happened 45 years ago or 40 years ago, and I will be sweating bullets thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. And I'm just as embarrassed now as I was back then. That's what your brain does. Okay? That's its job. In fact, it goes and hunts scenarios and it puts them in front of you. And if they're terrifying, then it pushes you to figure them out. And it may not be a figure outable problem. It just says, here, deal with this, figure it out. And if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, which by the way, does not mean you arrange your pens in your flipping desk drawer a certain way. OCD is not an adjective. It is debilitating. It can be. Like, it can make people afraid to go out of the house. You have to put on gloves so that you can touch a doorknob because it might have germs on it. All right. It's anxiety that shoots through the roof when you have certain thoughts. And so one of the things that happens with sexual OCD is people have regular, normal sexual thoughts pop in their heads, and their anxiety reacts so strongly against it. They think, oh no, you mustn't think that. And if I tell you not to think about an elephant, you're going to think about an elephant. So people who have obsessive compulsive disorder can't stop thinking about the stuff that terrifies them. And the trick to overcoming that, by the way, in therapy, is to have them think about the things that terrify them until their anxiety comes down. Which means if someone comes to me and they say, can't stop having sexual thoughts about my grandma, then what we do is we sit down and we write out a scenario about you having sex with your grandma, because that's what you're most terrified about. And if we do that 50 times, eventually it gets boring. You don't have anxiety about it anymore, and it stops being a problem. I know it sounds kind of wild. This is why it doesn't work to say, don't have lustful thoughts. I mean, that doesn't work for people with OCD. Why would it work for anybody else? Right? All right. So that's my scriptural, theological, pastoral, and counseling read on this passage. Yeah, I realize I've covered a lot of territory, but this is the thing that I think is important. The important takeaway is that when you read this stuff, you need to think about it in its context, who it's addressed to, what Jesus is trying to overcome in his situation. Now, I think if Jesus were coming and talking to a group today, he would say things a little bit differently, right? And I think part of it is when we read the Bible and we just grab a passage and we slap it onto contemporary life and we say something like, don't have sexual thoughts. We're fighting biology, we're fighting socialization, right? But we do need to think about, since so much of our lives revolve around these important things, sexuality, life and death, issues of life and death, anger and justice, right? Being a person of your word. How do we live that out then in such a way that brings peace in the world? That goes back to those Beatitudes, that makes us into prophetic voices, peacemaking voices, and so on. So I've said enough. I'll shut up for a bit and would love to hear your responses.
Dave, I think most of us would agree that James Dobson is pretty right wing.
Oh yeah.
Uh, in a session where he was being asked about this passage, though, he said that in a survey he had done, that 98% of people admitted to having masturbated, and the other 2% were lying.
Thank God. Go James.
I think that applies to having lustful thoughts and being angry too. Those are both just part of being human that you can deal with in healthy ways or unhealthy ways. Mm-hmm. But when somebody as conservative as James Dobson is saying that, it should wipe out a whole lot of the right-wing stuff that we hear.
Oh, absolutely. And can I piggyback on that? Because I think there's so much of what happens in political vitriol and in our situation today is people walking around with exactly that kind of guilt. Like, I'm a bad person because I masturbate or I have lustful thoughts, and therefore I have to project out on the world, you guys have to keep me safe from having sexual thoughts, or, it winds up being this, I hate to get too psychological here. It's a defense mechanism, right? They're projecting their own guilt on the rest of the world. Why don't you feel guilty? You should feel guiltier so that I feel better. I do think that's a huge part of our political discourse today.
Yes.
Miller, go ahead.
So this really falls into the book that I just finished reading, like, perfectly. It was called An Infinity of Little Hours, and it was about these 5 men beginning the journey to become Carthusian monks, who they take a vow of silence and basically live alone in a cell, except for going to church. But and like, so a lot of it's a contemplative order. And these 5 guys, you really saw the effect of sitting alone with your thoughts. Like, I don't know, it took control of them almost. Yeah. And sexual thoughts were one of the things that really, like, hit them hard, because let's be real, the Catholic Church is not cool with that, with monks having sexual thoughts. Just like the fact that the elephant was in the room with them, and they can't do anything about it. Like, they told them to do some terrible things, like tie up their wrists to keep from masturbating. It was really awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, so one of the things, and I've learned a lot from Buddhist teaching about acceptance and, becoming, like, in those situations where you're doing contemplative prayer or being, like you said, being alone with your thoughts. Instead of reacting having a strong emotional reaction to a thought, one of the things we try to teach people is simply to accept the thought and to observe it. Accept it doesn't mean pull it close and say, oh yes, this is who I am. I am fantasizing about sex with so-and-so. But you observe it and you just notice it. And without labeling it good or bad or without judgment, you let it happen, you observe it, and then it goes away over time. It's not, if you react to it strongly, whether that's to push it away or draw it close, it becomes a compulsion. It becomes something that you obsess over, or you feel, I'm trying to figure this out, or I'm trying to solve this. Whereas if you just observe it and let it go by, you can stay in a state of equanimity, right? You're not responding strongly to it. And you can start to do that if you can be the observer. You can do that with a lot of things. You can do that with physical discomfort. That's a great thing for chronic pain. It's a great thing but learning to accept these things, like, that's my thoughts and my feelings aren't me. They happen to me, or they come through my field of perception, but that's not who I am. And I think that's an important part, like, that we learn from contemplative stuff. Anyway. Yeah.
And I think,
go ahead, Miller.
Before
go ahead.
Rob goes, just one last little thing about that. The monks that got most comfortable with, being in the order and like they lived there long term. Most of them found like ways where they could bend the rules, and
Yeah.
not be quite so stiff,
Yeah.
because that's not really a good way to
Yeah.
live long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for that. Yeah, Rob.
So I think this is a really helpful and interesting reading of sort of Jesus's rhetorical strategy here, right? That he's deliberately using hyperbole. And the point is, it's funny, there's a slight, like, I am rubber, you are glue quality to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's basically, oh, you think you're so great because you haven't killed anybody, but you don't understand how seriously you should be taking anger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the funny thing is, we'll short circuit that and say, oh, anger in danger of hellfire. Oh, but it's like, no, in danger just means dangerous, right? You have to take it seriously. Because when we see him being angry, right? So like you said, that's not the issue. The issue is, well, what do you do with the anger? What does it mean? Are you taking it seriously or are you ignoring it, right? And that's why, he's exhorting people. So yeah, okay, make amends with people who are angry with you, right? Take it seriously enough to want to do that. And then likewise, the way you've sort of identified the heart of covetousness in what we've translated as lust. There's this sense of like, oh, you think you're so great because you haven't been running around, committing adultery, but like you don't understand that you're still just in a mindset of objectifying other people and wanting other people's, you want other people just like you want other people's stuff.
Yeah.
You give yourself a pass for that. Take it seriously. So I think, well, Camille has a good comment here in the chat that I think is really in line with what I'm thinking here. She says, by redefining lust into coveting, it changes the passage into a question of ownership. Seems Jesus is saying you shouldn't use someone in order to make yourself powerful. Then, when those who are lusting try to make the ones they are lusting after dress more modestly, it is still about exercising power over.
Oh, amen.
But most Christians are fearful of any Buddhist ideas, including letting thoughts pass, because Jesus. Like, thank you, Camille. Yes. I think it really, the power imbalance issue and the coveting of power over people seems like so much at the heart of what's going on here. So, but I do have a question, and this is coming from a place of trying to think about giving people a thorough reckoning with the passage, right? Like we can say the things that we've just said, and it all sounds very good and very reasonable, but I don't know that we've really decided what the rhetorical dimension is, what the hyperbole actually is, of cut off your hand and throw it away, pluck out your eye and throw it away, right? Like I can hear the voice in my head saying that is actually something that undermines the whole interpretation we're trying to bring to this. So I'd like to know what we say about that.
Yeah. Well, so first I want to say, I think I really like the way you kind of frame that as take this seriously, right? That's that part of it is like, yeah, take your anger seriously, take sexual desire seriously. And the bit that we often skip is the bit about making pledges at the end. I think that because that feels a little foreign to us, but take your word seriously, being a person of integrity and that kind of stuff. So I do want to affirm that. Yeah, I mean, I think the hyperbole about chopping off body parts and throwing them in the and Gehenna, by the way, I think we've talked about this before. Gehenna was the landfill, but it kind of symbolized judgment, the wastefulness of things. The idea that when God comes back in judgment, do you want to find that you've wasted your life, that it's all in the trash heap? I think this is an interesting passage because he actually says, and in this one it's different. In Luke, he says it's better for you to enter the kingdom with one hand than to have your whole body go into hell, or it's better to enter the kingdom with one eye, which in a way is a lot more absurd than the Matthew passage, because do you imagine a lot of one-armed, one-eyed people walking around in the kingdom, right? Like that was and the way they thought about lameness back in the day. There's even back in the Hebrew Bible, the phrase was King David hates those who are lame and blind, because the idea was that the lame, someone said the lame and blind will defend our city against you, or whatever. That was being maimed or disfigured was considered an awful thing. And so, yeah, this hyperbole, I think, touches on a lot of different parts that would have been very salient to people back in the day. I mean, it's still important to us now, but like ritually, think about being ritually maimed. If you were missing a testicle, or if your genitals were removed, you couldn't go to the temple. So, Jesus here talking about, it's better, and in the Luke version, it's better for you to go into life with missing an arm or an eye, or by extension, would be really kind of scandalous or shocking to the hearers. I don't know that I have a good answer for you, Rob, about the, it's a pretty harsh passage. I know that some modern people have read this with put a twist on it that I like, which is, a man saying to a woman, "You should cover up," and the woman replying, "Why don't you just tear your eye out?" That the idea is it's putting the responsibility back on the person who's, it's not her responsibility to keep your eyes from wandering, which I love that read on it. Again, I don't know that it helps us. Well, I'm really dealing with like Jesus's words to the people listening. I don't know that it solves that, but I really like that read on it. Yeah, Miller.
I kind of like the focus on like the self-responsibility in terms of like, because most of these things, it seems like you're trying to humanize the person who's taking you to court. You're trying to humanize the person who is angry with you. And if you think of them as a person, and you care about how you take care of them, like you take care of your own body, like you're not just gonna, self-harm for no reason. Like, yeah. I think it sort of flows into because the one we haven't talked about is the divorce passage.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have heard very harmful interpretations of that. One was like, well, if a woman is leaving her husband because he's abusing her, but he hasn't committed adultery,
mm-hmm.
She can't get remarried, but she could leave him.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, I heard that in a Bible class.
Yeah.
So I think in my mind, reading the divorce passage, it makes me think of like what would happen to a woman who you just sort of casually divorce like a piece of property back
mm-hmm.
in that time. She would have to get remarried because she didn't have any rights. She didn't have any property.
Mm-hmm.
So like you are forcing her to do something she doesn't want to do, probably, if she would rather stay married to you. Yeah, I see that angle.
Yeah, well, I think you put your finger on the power dynamic there. That there really is an issue about there, and I don't know that that's a hermeneutical key that makes that difficulty of the previous passage go away. But I definitely think in that second one, about divorce, that you have to consider the power dynamic going on and what you're forcing upon the woman, who's then treated as a piece of property. Yeah. Rob?
So just sort of picking up what Miller was saying, I mean, I think I can detect that in the body part language, there is this shifting of consequences, right? Because you were talking about, it's all these internal states and how we get a pass for these internal states. We give ourselves a pass for them, right? And Jesus's whole point is to take them seriously and not just push the consequences onto other people, right, as property and dehumanizing them, right? So I can kind of see that there's there's probably a very economical and maybe slightly over edited thing going on here, which is to illustrate the shift of the focus from what somebody else is doing and somebody else's body, right,
oh,
to
yeah.
you and your body, right, and he's deliberately telling them to do something absurd. It's like, well, so sit with that absurdity, right? I just told you to do something to your body that you're never going to do. Well, then why are you thinking about somebody else's body with the level of objectification that you're not going to think about your own body with, right? I could that makes some sense to me.
I really like that. I really like that read on it. I think that's a good insight, Rob. And as you were saying that, it also occurred to me that, I mean, you can almost imagine like all of these applying, and applying to a specific person that's sitting in the audience. I mean, the guy who is willing to, I mean, because he's, sees a woman he wants, divorces his current wife in order to marry her, right? Okay, so that's the one in the middle. This is also the guy who thinks he's a big man because he takes people to court, and he's, anger is like the one emotion that men are allowed to have. So he's, pissed off all the time, and I'm a pillar of the community, and I'm showing you what's what, and I'm teaching you how to be, and also I'm treating people as objects. And I do see
he's got a "Don't Tread on Me" flag, and he refuses to wear a mask.
Absolutely. So I mean, I do
truck
see
nuts
this
hanging off the back of his truck.
Truck nuts. That's definitely. I know. I do see. I mean, there's a patriarchal thing here, right? That he's undermining things that that a lot of men think defines who I am. My anger, my sexual power and social power, and I don't know how quite the pledges thing fits into there, but definitely I see this as stepping on toes. Well, we are like 5 minutes till. I really appreciate.
There's a couple of comments from Camille in the chat if we want to read them.
Yeah, please bring them out. Would you read them or read them?
Sure, happy to. So here's a good one. No pledges or oaths by putting your hand on a Bible when you make a promise. But how many folks freak if someone chooses not to use a Bible but some other book? It's the whole cultural / tribal conformity thing.
Yeah.
The rites must be observed. It's not about what they actually are, just that there are forms that must be observed.
Yes.
And could cutting off a body part be akin to considering the thoughts as a type of leprosy? You're a leper and a danger to the community if you bring these thoughts to the greater population. So if you're going to think only of the physical world, then lose a physical part. That does feel like a very vivid sort of conveying the reality. Again, it goes back to the idea of taking these mental states seriously. Take them as seriously as you would take something physical, right? They're not imaginary. They have real consequences, and not just for you.
Right. Well, that amputation was, I mean, that's a medical procedure to reduce further harm in that sense too. Yeah. Well, again, thank you all for a wonderful discussion. I'm going to go ahead and put the liturgy up so we can close out the day. Let's see. So this prayer is from Gertrude the Great. Lord, I see clearly that any affliction which I have ever had is scarcely as one drop in the vast ocean of all the seas, when compared with the tenderness of your divine heart toward those whom I love. Therefore, I cannot even by one thought wish anything other than that which your almighty wisdom has appointed for each of them. Lord, bless your special friends and mine, according to the good pleasure of your divine goodness. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So again, thank you all for being with us today. Thanks to those of you who were joining us on streaming. Again, if you've been watching, please like or leave a comment with where you're watching from. We love to have the opportunity to count you as being part of our group today. I'm gonna go ahead and end the live stream. Those of you on Zoom, stick around for